Hi everyone, it's Patrick Henry. After the last two videos that I've done recently, I've been getting a lot of messages. People have been asking me how to invest in property, and that is an extremely broad question. So I thought I'll bring it down and break it down and make it very simple for everyone and talk about one specific form of investment that I think is particularly easy. It's probably the best way and most cost-effective way of investing in property, and it's something that I call live-in investment. So I've written a blog on this. If you guys still like to read, which I assume there's one or two people out there that do still like to read, I wrote a blog on this a few months back. So if you go to patrickhenry.blog, it's www.patrickhenry.blog, you'll be able to read a better broken down version of what I'm going to explain to you right now. So essentially, live-in investment is something that I've done in the past. It's something that I will definitely do in the future. In fact, every property that I've owned and lived in has been somewhere along this line. So essentially, you're buying a property for the first time. Maybe you're looking at around the £500,000 mark. Let's just pluck a figure out of thin air there. And you decide that maybe that's too much of a stretch on your budget. Maybe that's ultimately where you want to be and where you want the property to be that you're going to buy. You've seen some properties around that range. They look good. They're the right size for you, right location. You can't quite afford to buy that property, or you want to make a property worth that without paying the money for it. So the way to go about this is to go out and look for a property that needs money spent on it. Or needs time and attention spent on it. So a property that's run down, maybe it's in disrepair. Maybe the property hasn't had any extension work done to it, and doing those extensions could bring the value of the property up. Buying that property, and either doing the work yourselves or hiring someone to do the work for you. I'd definitely advise, if you're not in the building trade, to not get stuck in and do too many of the complicated bits and pieces that may be involved in raising the value of your property. So, first of all, you need to find the location you're looking for, a property that you're going to be happy to live in, the right location, right size, because ultimately you will be living in this property. This is not just a matter of buying an asset, investing in it, and then selling it on straight away. Live-in investment is essentially what I did with my first purchase, which was buy a property, invest time and money whilst living in the property, raising the capital value of that property, either remortgaging and releasing money so that I could buy another property, or taking that money to use as my next step up the ladder. So if we take a property, for example, 500,000, property needs a lot of work doing to it. Maybe there's an old couple living in there that are selling up and moving off to Eastbourne or somewhere. No offense if you live in Eastbourne. And you know that if you were to spend 30 to 40 grand on a property, that property would be worth 600,000, rough example. You know that if you buy that property, you'll be able to spend the money, spend the time, and eventually, whether it takes a month, 2 months, 3 months, a year, that property value will go up with the work that you're going to do to it. So you buy the property in the traditional way. You've got a mortgage. Mortgages are very cheap at the moment. You don't need to get a commercial mortgage. You don't need to pay extra stamp duty as you would if it was a property investment where you weren't living in the property or as your second home. You don't need to wrap up the purchase in a company because it's your primary residence. You're living in the property. So you bought the property, you've saved money because you're on tax. You're living in the property, you're living not rent-free, but you don't have to live somewhere else while these works are going on. So you're saving money there. You invest in the property, you live in the property whilst the work's going on. You finish the works, maybe you do some of the works there, maybe some of the painting, some of the decorating, maybe helping out the builders that are working there. You can shop around and take your time to find good prices for the builders and maybe find good appliances or good fittings for the property, going on eBay and taking your time to find a good deal for certain bits and pieces. That's something that can really be afforded to you if you're living in the property. Whereas if it's a strictly commercial purchase or development, time is of the essence. The longer you've got a loan out for, the longer you've got an investor for, the more cost that's involved. But if you're living in the property anyway, you're going to be paying rent somewhere or a mortgage somewhere else. So you're going to be living in the property, so the cost is mitigated massively. You then spend that money, you then invest in the property value goes up, and you're left with a property that's worth more. Your equity in the property has gone up, and then you can make a decision from there what to do. Do you remortgage the property, say it's a year or 2 years down the line, depending on how long your mortgage is for? And do you release some of the equity and invest in a new property? Or do you do what I'm suggesting here with live-in investment, which is take your mortgage, find another property, sell your property and port it onto the next property. This is the second way that you save money. Because you're moving from one property to the next, you don't come into the capital gains threshold. There's no tax ramifications for selling that property at a profit. The government don't see that as something that they should tax, which is surprising because they tax everything else, including dying. You take that money and you move on to the next property, missing out any capital gains tax from the capital growth that you've had in that property, and you move on to the next property. Great thing about that is you can take your mortgage with you. So if you've got a great product over here, you can take it with you to your next property over here, and you can carry on and you could do the same thing. Depending on the gap between the two properties, it's possible to release some equity as well, so that you've got some money that you can put into the next purchase. Maybe you're going to go for a grander extension, maybe it's a much bigger project, but that gives you the option to do so. Sometimes people don't even want to upsize the property, they just want to gain more equity in the property that they're living in. Maybe they're moving location, maybe work's changed or whatever else, but you have that ability to release that extra equity from that property and make a decision depending on what you want to do with your life. So that is by far the easiest way that I know to invest in property. You can do it as many times as you like. That property will always be your primary residence if you move from one property to the next to the next. And you can make a decision what to do every single time, whenever you want, with great flexibility. Depending on your mortgage position, you should always check that with your broker. If you have a 5-year fixed mortgage, and you try to redeem that mortgage, so sell the property and not buy another property, or sometimes when you're porting a property, there are costs, there may be an early redemption penalty. An early redemption penalty is where the bank says, well, you said you were going to have this mortgage for 5 years, you've only had it for 3, therefore we want some of the interest that we're going to miss out on. So be very careful about that. Make sure you take that into account. If that is your plan to move to another property or to sell the property, make sure you ask your broker what the early redemption charges are, so make sure you don't get stung. So there we go, that's Live in Investment. Remember, check out the blog, which is www.patrickhenry.blog, and it'll give you a more broken down, more nuanced idea of how to go about making this sort of property investment. So I hope you enjoyed. Leave us a comment, keep dropping messages, and let me know what you want to hear me talk about. Very happy to do question and answers, and hopefully have some guests in soon to talk about more specific forms of investment, and maybe some other professionals like lawyers and accountants to talk about some of the more specific fields. All right, hope you're all good. Take care of yourselves. Bye-bye.